without further ado, I think we will jump into the topic of the hour, Absolute Batman, because that seems to have hit it off pretty big. I believe as of this recording, they are in the third round of printings for the first issue, maybe fourth, I'm not sure, but it has taken off. Absolute Batman is part of DC's new Absolute Universe, which includes Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman titles for the moment. It's a new take on iconic characters, and the big difference between Absolute Batman and his counterparts in other universes is that this Bruce Wayne isn't a billionaire. Thomas Wayne was a teacher rather than a doctor, and Wayne Tech really isn't a thing, at least so far. So you reviewed this on the Comic Book Chronicles channel, Rob, and I'll let you speak for it, but my takeaway was that it was kind of middle of the road for you.
Yeah, and Scott, first of all, thank you for having me back. I'm happier than Mr. Freeze at the Ice Capades to be here with you. And yeah, absolute Batman. Okay, this came out on October 9th. And it had a lot of hype behind it, right? The DC hype machine was in full force. And like you said, the author is Scott Snyder. And Scott Snyder is, there's certain things he's done that I think are awesome. There's certain things he's done that I really don't like. There's at least one thing that he's done that I think is offensive. So I came in here not sure what I was going to get, and what I got, I think the word I used in the video I made for it was meh. And what surprised me about this is that the reaction that I got from people was very defensive, more defensive than with anything I think I've ever covered in the 2 years or so that I've been doing what I'm doing. I had somebody say it's peak, dude. Okay, well, the thing about it is that I can't get anybody to tell me what's so peak about it. That's the thing. I had one person try, and he kind of got in the ballpark, but nobody seems to be able to tell me why this is so good. And here's the thing: it's not offensive to me. Okay, I just don't understand why we have to I don't know, be parading around the Times Square wetting our pants for this book like a lot of people seem to be. I mean, does that make sense?
That makes sense. And actually, I was going to ask you as a follow-up before we get into that discussion. You know, I know you haven't been reading Detective Comics for a while. You kind of made that clear in your Detective Comics review of Tom Taylor's new run. But
Yeah, 1070 or 1090,
yeah,
forgive me.
and and Batman, I can't remember how you feel on the core Batman title, but I'm wondering if those current titles and their reception, weighs it in with how people are reacting to this.
Yeah, I mean, Chip Zdarsky's Batman run, I thought his most recent issue was pretty good. I mean, promising. And but the thing about Detective Comics is that, well, I hadn't enjoyed the Zdarsky stuff for a while on the Batman main series. The thing about Detective Comics, though, is that I had stopped it cold about 2 years ago. I think that issue 1090 was only the second issue of Tech that I've ever talked about publicly, and it's just because I fell off it. I couldn't get into it. It didn't do it for me. And sometimes when that's the case, you're better off reading the stories in trade format as opposed to as individual installments. I don't know if that was the issue. It's certainly nothing against the team that was on Tech at the time, but yeah, with Detective Comics, it was just such a breath of fresh air and familiarity. And it's like, okay, Batman's here to save the day, by God. And I'm more enthusiastic about Detective Comics and, quite frankly, the regular Batman series than I have been in a while. And with Absolute Batman, I'm sure we'll talk about the Ultimate Universe at Marvel in a minute, but I mean, I just didn't see the point of going there. Like, what do we need? What do we need an absolute universe for? Why are we venturing down this path? So I decided, okay, I'm gonna give these absolute universe books, Absolute Batman, Absolute Superman, and Absolute Wonder Woman. I'm gonna give them each one issue, to kind of impress me and, for lack of a better term, kind of justify their existence to me and sell me on why I should be spending $5 a month here. And Absolute Batman just didn't do it for me. It didn't hook me in. It didn't impress me. It didn't intrigue me. Absolute Wonder Woman did. We could talk about that later if you want, but yeah, I didn't get it with Absolute Batman. I don't understand it. Someone explain it to me. Can you explain it to me?
No, I don't think so. Well, I think we're kind of in a similar camp because I do want to talk about the connection with Ultimate and the idea of the absolute universe justifying its existence because I have that actually in my notes somewhere of,
Okay.
what the deal is with this. But, you know,
What's
for
the
people,
deal with that?
yeah, for people listening, we're
Like,
going to be going into spoiler territory for the rest of this podcast. Just a warning. We're going to talk about older Elseworld titles, some of which are like 30 years old or more,
mhm,
but just a blanket spoiler for what's to come. If you haven't read Absolute Batman, I recommend you read it, come back and listen to this episode as well as our TBU Comics podcast episode where those guys reviewed it too. We'll see if you relate to our thoughts, if you have disagreements, other feelings, what have you. If you can justify or explain why this is peak, I think that would be very helpful. But
mhm,
just a blanket warning there before we talk about this, because I think part of the thing we need to clear the air on is all the changes that exist in this universe. Now, I mentioned when we are talking about it that, Bruce Wayne isn't a billionaire. That was like a big selling point is he's not a billionaire, but I don't actually see how that really makes any difference in this issue because it seems like he has access to all the gadgets and stuff that he needs anyways.
mhm. He seems to be a fully formed Batman already.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, mind you, this is a first chapter. So there are things that, if you're going to keep reading, you might learn that we don't know yet. So, let's be fair in that sense. But yeah, he's okay. If part of the selling point here is that Bruce Wayne is not wealthy, he's more of a, I don't know if we want to say everyman, but he's not rich. Okay, well, how does that factor in? How does that make a difference in how Batman is Batman? And in terms of selling me on this story, I didn't see it. I didn't get it. And if he's not rich and he's not, if he's not the Bruce Wayne that we know, how does he have access to all of his Batman stuff? I mean, is he sitting at home making it himself? Does he have a guy that he goes to? And I don't need full-fledged answers here, but maybe throw me a hint. Throw
Right.
me a freaking bone here, Scott.
Totally. And, other things that are in this book, because we're in spoiler territory, is,
Mm-hmm.
Alfred Pennyworth's a secret agent. Martha Wayne is still alive. Killer Croc is running a gym that Bruce uses, and Bruce is kind of like the gigantic, brooding presence at that gym. There's a card
Mm-hmm.
game with a lot of rogues. Selena Kyle was mentioned, so was Riddler. Black Mask is running a gang called the Party Animals, who, surprise,
Mm-hmm.
surprise, wear party animal masks of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
And then we see Falcones and Maronis get bumped off, all in issue one. So you have all these things going on there, but really, it's kind of a big okay, because it doesn't feel like any of these changes really have a narrative point. There's no theme. And yes, it is the first issue, but like at this point, I
Yes.
think I just felt like a lot of these things were just because, like Batman has an axe, he pulls that logo off his chest and makes a little axe out of it. And you're like, well, that's kind of cool. And I feel like, I guess style over substance is probably the best phrase for this book. And it's very
Yeah.
beautiful. I love Nick Dragotta's art.
Yes, I have nothing bad to say about Nick Dragotta on the art or Frank Martin, who I believe is the colorist. Nothing,
Mhm.
nothing bad to say in that regard. I mean, they execute what they're supposed to execute effectively. I particularly enjoy, and I've got the issue in front of me because I not only did I buy a digital copy, but I brought a hard copy. So you're welcome, DC. I love the two-page spread of the moon and Batman on the motorcycle, revving up and going forward. That was a fantastic way to close things. But yeah, style over substance. Now, I'm really not picking on Scott Snyder here. I'm really not. But Scott Snyder is also the guy who wrote the Dark Knight's Metal and Dark Knight's death metal books. Am I right?
Yeah.
So my understanding is that Scott Snyder is a metalhead. Nothing wrong with being a metalhead. You can be a metalhead if you want. But it's just like I'm sensing that what he wanted to do. I'm sensing that what he wanted to do was make death metal Batman. Like, okay, Batman pulls an axe off the bat emblem on his chest. Batman has spikes that pop out of his shoulders and poke people. It's very Grim Reaper, Hell's Angels type thing. When the spikes popped out of Batman's back, I just wanted to shout. It's like, Siri play Bat Country by Avenged Sevenfold. Oh my God, it's so metal. And it's like, it's almost like he's appealing to the bros in the audience, in my opinion. It's like we're not as much interested, at least yet, in telling a compelling story so much as we're interested in making people say, "Oh my God, that's badass. He's got an axe and he chopped that guy's arm off. That's badass. He's got spikes. That's badass." It's like, okay, maybe it is badass, but what else have you got?
Yeah.
You know what I
And
mean?
actually what you're describing too reminds me of, like, I liked the first metal. I
Yeah.
dipped out of issue 1 of Death Metal, so I don't know how the rest of that played out. I just was gone. But
Hmm.
I did read all of, was it Last Night on Earth or whatever that was?
Oh, see. I didn't read that one. That was that
That
Snyder and Capullo.
I can't remember who the artist was, but it was a Scott Snyder book, and it was
Okay,
like that
got it.
post-apocalyptic Joker's heads in a jar kind of a thing. And
Yeah, yeah.
like, and that, admittedly, everything you're saying and describing makes me think of that book, because that's how that book felt. It was just like, well, why is this like this?
Uh-huh.
Reasons, yeah, you know. And there's this, and it was short. It wasn't a long story, but
No.
I didn't like it because I was left with, I don't know why I was even here to begin with. But I think hopping over to the Ultimate Universe, and I know we have a new Ultimate Universe, but I do want to travel back through time to the year 2000, or anywhere between 2000 and the original Ultimate Universe's 2015 ending, for
Hmm.
Marvel. But like when we got Spider-Man, Brian Michael Bendis took it slow with that
Yeah.
introduction. He just like eased us into, a modern retelling, new technology, but Peter is
Hmm.
essentially the same. It's the same
Yeah.
character, but it's just kind of an updated refresher, because them just selling reprints at the time or prior to that wasn't really working out for them. No one was buying. So, but you had this very slow buildup. I think it took a few issues for him to become Spider-Man, if I remember right, the first time.
At least four. Yeah. Yeah. I think as I recall, the one of the motivations behind the Ultimate Universe, the original one, mind you, from Marvel, was to, you know, refresh and modernize the Marvel universe and its characters, specifically with Spider-Man, because I think I remember Joe Quesada at the time saying, they were worried that the character was dying on them. Just, they needed a breath of fresh air. They needed something new and vibrant and all that stuff. So that was the goal. And in the case of Ultimate Spider-Man, the original Ultimate Spider-Man, they definitely succeeded in doing that. I mean, I read Ultimate Spider-Man, at one point I caught up to when it was coming out. So I was reading the issues. That was my introduction to comic book Spider-Man. And then I crossed over to mainline MCU Spider-Man. So essentially, I did what they wanted me to do. So that's the when you read that first Ultimate Spider-Man issue, you got a sense, okay, this is what's different here. He's still kind of the same guy, but this is a new spin. This is a different kind of spin. With Absolute Batman, I don't know what the spin is besides,
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
like a lot of stuff's thrown at the wall, and you don't have that grounding other than like, well, that's Batman, but like it's, this Batman's huge. Yes,
yeah.
and he's got a lot of weird gadgets and stuff, and Alfred is not Alfred. He's, a secret agent who, you know, loses his gun to Batman. You know what I mean? Like it's just
Hmm.
so it is.
Yeah.
It seems like there could have been, like, if Scott Snyder slowed it down and took his time more with like refamiliarizing us with a Bruce that is very similar to the one we know, maybe we wouldn't have that problem because in Ultimate Spider-Man, it wasn't perfect, the original run.
No,
It had
no.
some changes I didn't like, especially with, I would say, Carnage and the whole
Mm,
Gwen Stacy connection. But
yeah. Yeah.
when those things happen, you just kind of read past them and you're like, well, okay, I didn't like this arc, but like everything
Mm,
else I still like. The core is still there, the heart's there. So jumping forward though to now, we have a new
hmm.
Ultimate line from Marvel,
Yes.
which I haven't been reading a lot of them. I've read Ultimate Spider-Man and I dipped at issue 6, I believe.
Okay. Okay.
And we could get in that into that too, but I bring this up because it seems like Marvel and DC they have this game right now. We have Ultimate Universe, we have the Absolute Universe. Who's going to outsell whom, and
Yeah,
and
well, that's, I
they
mean,
have
that's always the game.
similarities
Yeah, that's
too.
always the game though. Who's going to outsell who? But yeah, I mean, I don't know I don't think this absolute universe exists if not for the ultimate universe over at Marvel. I mean, I don't think anybody was in particular crying out for ultimate universe or ultimate versions of Batman and Wonder Woman and whatnot. But it's like, okay, if you're going to give them to us and let's see what we got. Now with the current modern Ultimate line at Marvel, Ultimate Spider-Man hasn't scared me off yet. There's issue we're on issue 10 now. And there's some issues that I like, some issues I don't like. And with Ultimate X-Men, I played with that book for a while, and that's a really different take. They're in Japan, I believe, and the X-Men are actually a group of young girls. And Ultimate Black Panther I read a little bit of, and then there was the Ultimates, which is like their take on the Avengers. But with Ultimate Spider-Man and Ultimate X-Men, we knew what the new spin was immediately. In Ultimate Spider-Man, Peter gets his powers when he's already a full-grown adult. He's married to Mary Jane. He's got two kids. It's a different spin, a different take on the Spider-Man character. He still looks the same, and it's still Peter Parker, but it's a different kind of story. With Ultimate X-Men, the change is even greater. We've got, there's no Wolverine, there's no Cyclops, there's no Storm. It's a big risk, quite frankly, to have an X-Men book out there without those characters. And what I wanted with Absolute Batman, don't just give me the same guy in a slightly modified package. I mean, okay, if you want to modernize it, modernize it. If you want to make it somebody besides Bruce Wayne, make it somebody besides Bruce Wayne. It doesn't have to be Bruce Wayne. I'll get into that later, but yeah, it didn't they didn't hook me. That's the bottom line with Absolute Batman. They didn't hook me, they didn't sell me. They sprinkled in things there that were intriguing. I'll say that. Thomas Wayne in that book is killed in a mass shooting at a zoo, I believe. Because all the grisly mass shootings that happen in America happen at zoos, by the way. But you know, that's interesting. You could have factored it in. You could have factored that in a little bit more, and maybe they will. But I don't see it, and I want somebody to give me an explanation for what's so great about this besides metal, and some pretty art. Credit where
And
credit is due.
I think though you hit on an interesting point with the zoo and the mass shooting connection because I feel like if taking into the point and actually giving this a point, really centralizing more around that idea of, Bruce was a kid and he was a kid during a mass shooting, something that unfortunately like a lot of people can relate to,
That's
more than,
relevant.
yeah, as and either personal experience knowing someone or hearing about it on the news constantly, like one of those elements. I feel like
Mhm.
that is the grounding thing that this book really could use to give it that kick in the pants. But
Yeah, and if I don't know how far we want to go down this rabbit hole, but I mean, no, I mean we live in a country where, as we're recording this, we live in a country where a few years ago, a bunch of people decided to storm the Capitol building because they felt that justice was not being served, you know? And, you know, Batman is a vigilante who feels that in the city around him, in the world around him, justice is not being served. So, if you talk about wanting to put a modern spin on it, at what at what point is vigilantism acceptable? At what point do you take the law into your own hands? And when you do take the law into your own hands, what are the lines you draw? What are the rules you can and can't break? How do you treat, criminals? How do you treat civilians? What are the different degrees you use? I guess I was hoping for something with substance along those lines. And instead, what I got was this is harsh, but I feel like I got black metal fluff.